The date is September 29, 2018. This is another lesson in my New Testament is Fake series. This lesson is titled Revelatory Power of the Romans. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews had their writings, they had their scrolls, and it was mainly their writings. When they had their teachings, their books, it was just their business. Officially, it was just the revelation of God to Israel. Like Psalm 147, 19 and 20 says, He showeth his word unto Jacob. He hath not done thus with any other nation. So this was just theirs. You might have some sojourners, a trickle of people here and there from time to time who will come to do business in the land of Israel or on the outskirts, people living on the outskirts of the land of Israel proper, and they'll hear about the laws and they'll pick up on it, and while living there or close by, they'll follow what the Israelites are saying, and some gave their hearts to the Torah commandments. But that's a trickle here and there from what we gather. But whole, entire nations weren't just flocking to the Torah and to Yahweh, the God of Israel. If that was the case, which I'm surprised it was not, then a lot of nations would have been converted, a lot of sinning would have stopped on the earth, we would have a different world today, and God would have accomplished what he was faking to do from the Garden of Eden, because as I mentioned in another recording, the real problem in the so-called fall of man was that sin came in because of what Adam and Eve did. So if they fell, then mankind fell, as the popular teaching goes. So why does the God of Israel and the nation of Israel spend so much time trying to fix Israel's problem when, quote-unquote, mankind's problem goes untouched? But as the book of Israel, even today, it seems so Old Testament-like, it seems so nation of Israel-like, no matter who you say Israel is, that it is clearly their book. So from the outside, it looks like a book of Israel, the Torah. And from the inside, when you are studying the Torah deeply, it clearly seems like a book of Israel. The Old Testament / the Torah is just Israel. And then they threw in another fancy term, the Tanakh, just to make you know that this is just something just for us. That's why I don't find Christians using, for example, using the word Tanakh. But the power of revelation from God to the Israelites gave them a book with writings that was owned by them, and little did other nations want it. In fact, other nations and people groups seem to, in an uncanny way, have strikingly similar laws. Like you hear of the whole Hammurabi code of laws. You hear of Egypt having those laws before Israel was even a mention on earth. And so other nations seem to have similar kinds of laws, but somehow it becomes Israel's laws and Israel's book. And even though Babylon, with the code of Hammurabi from the Cushites, had the same kind of laws in general, when Israel is shown to be the one that gets God to spiritually show up in a dynamic way on Sinai, nobody in this Hammurabi kingdom says from Babylon, wow, we want to check that out. Imagine you have a computer, like a laptop, and all you can do is type on it and check your email and play some games. But then you see somebody else with a laptop that turns into a spaceship and they fly to another galaxy and they come back and they fly and they come back. And you don't go look for them and say, hey, how does your laptop do that? So Hammurabi doesn't, the Babylonians, they don't express interest in how Israel got the same kind of law codes to produce something like what happened in a dynamic manner at Sinai. The Egyptians who had those laws, they say, before Moses went up to Sinai, those Egyptians with the wise pharaohs and all the science and the breaking discoveries and explorations of the earth and the cosmos and everything of the Egyptians, those Egyptians, they don't bother ask Israel questions. Moses comes up to the Pharaoh, let my people go, and then he witnesses the miracles of 10 plagues, and he doesn't wonder, you're using the same kind of laws that we have, but you get it to do something mighty and powerful. How did you get that to happen? Like the Egyptians and the Cushites had prided themselves to be a wonder on earth, until when even the Greeks went and found them later on, they said the Cushites were like the favorite of the gods. But the Pharaoh saw Moses doing mighty miracles in his own land. And the Pharaoh and the priests, the wise priests of Israel, who were like the scientists, they don't want to know anything from Moses about how did you make that work. They were progressive in their sciences, their cosmology, and their medicine and biology and everything else that they did. But they don't want to know how he made miraculous things happen. Water turned into blood and frogs coming up everywhere, darkness coming almost at the snap of a finger. They don't want to know all that stuff. I mean, the pyramids are credited to them, that still remains a wonder today, but they don't care how Moses had stuff happen on Sinai and how he's able to work all these miracles. Like somehow, as soon as God shows up in a man called Moses, the Egyptians lose all sense on earth, but we still wonder about the mystery of the Egyptians and the Sphinx to this day. But I'm just discussing the Torah of the Lord God. So let's get off the Egyptians. But all the stuff that happened with Israel back then, it formed the writings of the children of Israel and their mighty God, the God of the Hebrews. And this was just known as their books. Even in the time of the Romans, it was still known that this was these were the writings of the Hebrews. We understand now, through Caesar's Messiah, that the Romans confiscated the writings of the Hebrews. So obviously, they felt that the book of the Hebrews was unique and was powerful, and they had to do something about it. This was theirs. It was different from everybody else's writings in their religions, in their lands. The Hebrews book was out of this world. But as out of this world as it was, it seemed to not reach or evangelize the nations around them. But when I was in the Christian church, we were told that it was Israel's job to evangelize the world, but they failed at it through their transgression. So Jesus came and started a new business that some Hebrews work for. They don't bother with the business of the Most High, who said, don't get involved with other gods. But they chose a new God who they say is all right to believe in him because he's the God of the other God, the bigger God, who himself said, don't take any other gods, don't worship any other gods. So even if it is a little God, a smaller God, which is my son, it still forbids the Israelite, forbids the Hebrew from dealing with any size God, whether it's a big God, a little God, or a middle God. But the Hebrews today say, some of them, this littler God, Jesus, that we call by special Hebrew names, it's all right if we deal with him. But there goes the book story of the Hebrews with their unique writings. That was just for them, and nobody else can claim that. In the New Testament times now of the Romans, with their revelatory power and divine blessing of God to handle the word of life, as they say, was somehow drawn into a frenzy of madness, and they killed the supposed Son of God. I can only imagine that as my mind goes crazy to try to understand the whole thing, that if I was making some kind of movie of this or some story, I would just kind of paint the picture that God or the Father got mad. He got upset because the Romans killed his son. So now, once they understand this, the Romans, they're like apologizing crazily now. Sorry, Father, we killed your son, sorry. And they apologize and major. They'll be like, well, we'll make up for it. We'll write a book for him. So they're trying to mend things, they're patching things up. All right. So they write the book. They put out this book, a new book, the New Testament, the second book, supposedly, of the Hebrews. And when they write this book, it does something by the sheer power of its revelation that the older original book, the writings of the Hebrews or the Torah, with all its power and revelation from God, was never able to accomplish. The Hebrews kept theirs to themselves. Nobody seemed to be interested in it too much. Didn't care much about their Yahweh except a trickle of strangers from other nations. But when the Romans, with their divine revelatory power and unction from God, put together the New Testament and finished writing it, published it, sent it out, all kinds of nations on earth flocked to it and just grab it up like crazy in a way they never did with the Torah. Everybody on earth wants a piece of this new book from God, from the Roman Empire, such that the divine power of revelation from God through his son Jesus, or Yahushua, or Yahawashai, or Yasha, or Yeshua in the New Testament times flowed through the pen of the Romans so strongly and with such power that maybe the only thing that could probably come close to it was the power smiting the Egyptians in the 10 plagues of the miracles of Moses from the Most High. But you've got Rome covering many nations, because different nations, different people groups were in the Roman Empire and the Roman territories that they took over. So you've got a lot of different people groups there, a lot of different nations. All these nations were so interested in becoming believers of this Son of God, but not quite God. The Son of Yahweh, but not quite Yahweh according to his Torah laws. But they wanted the New Testament book so that the New Testament took off. And notice that in modern times, in our world, the Bible was sold in great numbers because the New Testament was in it, is the way I see it. But if the Hebrews had tried to sell their Torah throughout the ancient world, it wouldn't fly that well. But as soon as the revelation from the Romans flowed out of their pens and puts together a New Testament, now the rest of the world can get access also to the Torah, so that it's the New Testament that carries the swing. So the power of the Romans is such that when they begin to deal with God, unlike when the prophets were dealing with God, when they begin to write for God, unlike when the Torah scribes wrote for God. Then all of a sudden, you got nations in Assyria, all over Mesopotamia and Babylon, everywhere, even in the New World now that things have moved on. Everybody owns a Bible, and in some cases, only the New Testament alone, such that you're finding them even in hotels everywhere. You're finding from the writings of the Romans. Now, if Psalm 147, 19 and 20 says he gave his word only to Jacob, and when Jacob had it, the world didn't really want it. In fact, even the Hebrews didn't want it as much because they were rejecting it sometimes and going on to the beliefs of other pagan nations. Then why is it that there is a Hebrew Israelite today in 2018 who does not suspect that something must be wrong if the Hebrews in the Torah days, thousands of years ago, could not get their book to fly all over the earth, but as soon as the Romans make a newer book for a Calvary Messiah, then the whole thing takes off? Why does the Hebrew Israelite today not suspect there is something fishy about the Calvary Messiah and the new book? The divine power, revelatory power of the Romans. It got it done. But the revelation to the Israelites could not move their book all over the earth. New Testament is suspect.